Welcome to the debate. Today, we are delving into one of the most successful and I'd say prescriptive movements in modern high performance culture, the mandate to rise daily at 5 a.m. It's a methodology, of course, that was widely popularized by Robin Sharma's work, the 5 a.m. Club.
And the idea is, it's simple, but it's also revolutionary for millions of people. The idea that controlling that first hour of your day basically determines the success of your entire life.
Exactly. But it forces us to confront, really, the limitations of this kind of prescriptive advice. The core tension we're looking at today is this. Is rising at 5 a.m. a necessary and, universally effective discipline for achieving elite performance? Or does this rigid approach just fundamentally overlook crucial biological and psychological differences between people? I'll be arguing that the dedicated 5 a.m. victory hour, that first hour dedicated solely to self-improvement, is the foundational practice for building self-mastery, for eliminating distraction, and for achieving, world-class results.
And I'm going to maintain that imposing a strict 5 a.m. wake-up call disregards our genetically influenced sleep chronotypes, it risks chronic sleep deprivation, and it often results in something we call social jet lag, which, ultimately makes the whole thing counterproductive for a huge portion of the population.
All right, let's start by defining that advocate position. My core argument, really, is that extraordinary results, they don't stem from luck or talent. They come from consistent, intense discipline that's applied during this one dedicated victory hour. The ultimate goal is to maximize what the philosophy calls one's capitalization IQ, which is essentially the actualization of your potential through relentless, structured practice. It means you stop letting potential just stay potential, and you start making it a reality.
Right.
The key insight here is that early rising is the one practice that elevates every other practice. It's about leveraging the hours that the vast majority, the 95%, waste, which the world's most successful top 5% absolutely treasure.
Okay, but you're putting the emphasis entirely on willpower and discipline. I come at this from a fundamentally different way. The 5 a.m. rule is, I think, critically flawed because it ignores that human biology is not uniform. The fact is, not all brains are wired to wake up at 5 a.m. We know that sleep chronotypes, the genetic difference between early birds and night owls, are largely set by our DNA. They dictate when our internal biological clock, our circadian rhythm, naturally wants us to sleep and wake. Forcing a 5 a.m. start on a late chronotype, it often results directly in chronic sleep deprivation.
The methodology is specifically engineered to optimize brain performance by leveraging the unique quietude of the early morning. Rising at 5 a.m. is designed to facilitate the flow state, stimulating what is sometimes called the brain's pharmacy of mastery. And this state is achieved in those quiet morning minutes when you see a natural decline in cortisol, the stress hormone, and at the same time, an increase in beneficial neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. This process shifts your brain waves from the frantic beta state, where we typically operate, down to the reflective alpha and even regenerative theta states.
And that's the ideal state for focus. I agree.
Exactly. This is why the core structure of the victory hour is the 20-20-20 formula. The first 20 minutes for intense exercise, the second 20 for reflection and planning, and the final 20 for deep learning. It's a structured approach designed to harness the brain's peak state before the world even wakes up.
I absolutely agree that achieving that hormonal balance and focus is the goal, but if the underlying biology is being violated, the benefits of the 20-20-20 formula are, they're moot. The critical evidence here is that our internal clocks are incredibly individualized. If you impose a 5 a.m. wake time on a late chronotype, you create a state of chronic misalignment. This is social jet lag, where your schedule forces you out of sync with your biology.
And what are the physiological consequences of that?
Well, the effects include elevated stress, increased anxiety, and studies have linked this chronic misalignment to cardiovascular risk. But even more immediately relevant to productivity, our most important REM sleep, which is critical for creativity, for memory, for mood stabilization, it occurs heavily toward the latter half of the sleep cycle.
A rigid 5 a.m. wake-up almost guarantees interrupting that final critical REM cycle. And that leaves the person irritable, fuzzy, and less creative, not primed for productivity.
This brings us directly to the central tension that your argument highlights. The age-old battle between nature and nurture. You're emphasizing the genetic reality of chronotypes, suggesting we are sort of constrained by our biology.
Precisely. We know chronotypes are largely genetic. When we deliberately misalign our wake time, we are essentially subjecting our bodies to a low-grade constant jet lag. And this doesn't just make you tired. It disrupts endocrine function, metabolic health. My argument is that true high performance has to prioritize sufficient quality sleep that is aligned with the chronotype, not an arbitrary time. For night owls, the smart approach is to shift those focused tasks, the equivalent of the 20-20-20, to their natural peak window, which might be 8 to 11 p.m.
I see what you think then, but let me give you a different perspective. One focused on the transformational power of nurture. While genetics undoubtedly play a role in, let's say, inclination, the methodology teaches that willpower and personal discipline are muscles. They are developed through relentless, intentional practice. They are not innate talents. Success demands doing what the 95% are unwilling to do, and that often means overcoming initial discomfort and, yes, biological resistance. The philosophy is explicitly about transformation, which is why it lays out the precise habit installation protocol. 22 days of destruction of the old habit, 22 days of installation of the new one, and 22 days of integration, a total of 66 days. This structured, conscientious effort is what's necessary to make the new 5 a.m. routine your new normal and automatic. You aren't fighting an immutable law. You are simply training resilience.
Wait, are you suggesting the 66-day protocol is enough to fundamentally rewire a genetically predisposed chronotype? I mean, that seems to defy decades of biological research. You can create a habit of waking up, but you can't create the internal hormonal profile that supports high function if the body is starved of its necessary REM cycles.
It's not about fighting the body. It's about establishing the internal consistency required for the body to adapt. The philosophy emphasizes that we often use biology as an excuse for a lack of commitment. If you commit to the early rise, you are naturally forced to commit to an earlier bedtime. The whole system is predicated on this interconnected consistency.
That commitment is a significant variable, however.
That modern life is an addiction to distraction. The early hour is the only guaranteed time to deploy what it calls the tight bubble of total focus, or TBTF. The TBTF is essentially a dedicated, protected zone where you shield yourself from all digital noise for 60 minutes. This is an essential countermeasure to distraction. That solitude and intense concentration, they accelerate performance that is simply impossible later in the day.
That's an interesting point, and the TBTF is certainly a valuable concept. But I would frame it differently. The solitude of 5 a.m. is functionally worthless if the individual hasn't first secured optimal sleep. We know that optimal cognitive function requires 5 complete 90-minute sleep cycles nightly. That's 7.5 hours.
Right.
So if a night owl is trying to adhere to this 5 a.m. rule, but habitually pushes bedtime past 11 p.m. or, midnight, they suffer what the literature calls a sleep recession. You might be awake at 5 a.m., but your cortisol levels will be high, your prefrontal cortex will be impaired, and you won't be able to orchestrate the disciplined focus required by the 20-20-20 formula. The early hour is a tool, yes, but sleep is the essential, non-negotiable fuel.
But the system integrates the necessity of that fuel. The entire methodology relies on the twin cycles of elite performance. Periods of intense effort must be meticulously balanced with periods of deep rest and recovery. The 5 a.m. start isn't a standalone activity. It's the activation point of a meticulously balanced system that emphasizes quality sleep. The framework inherently pushes the user toward the necessary 7.5 hours of sleep by demanding the early rise.
That assumes an ideal environment where the individual has complete control. And this brings up a critical issue: applicability and, frankly, the socioeconomic context.
What specifically are you referring to?
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the entire methodology is accessible to all. The framework is deeply focused on achieving personal mastery through the four interior empires: mindset, heartset, health set, and soul set. And while those are fantastic goals, the narrative is built around figures like the billionaire mentor Stone Riley, who travels by private jet. This inherently overlooks the inequality paradigm. It ignores contextual factors like economic disparities, single parenthood, shift work. How can a person who finishes a night shift at 3 a.m. or a single parent with 3 children to get ready by 7 a.m. realistically protect the 5 a.m. hour for abstract internal work? Grit is necessary, but context often determines if that grit is applied to self-mastery or just survival.
That is a compelling point regarding external demands, but let me offer a refinement. The essence of the methodology, I think, transcends material wealth, and really, it transcends the exact time of 5 a.m. itself. The story shows individuals facing deep professional crises, not wealthy elites, who find transformation. The principle of micro-wins and day stacking, the idea that small daily improvements yield staggering results over time, is fundamentally accessible to all.
I'm not so sure.
Look, the core asset being leveraged is daily time, and the goal is to own 60 minutes of that time, whenever it falls. If 5 a.m. is structurally impossible, the discipline is in finding an equivalent protected hour. The commitment is what matters, not the luxury jet. The transformation relies on commitment and internal work, leveraging true grit, not on wealth.
I agree that the principle of time ownership is transferable, but the specific, prescriptive nature of the 5 a.m. start and the immense cultural pressure around it disadvantages those whose lives are already dictated by external demands. The ability to isolate and protect that first hour is a privilege. It requires both time and an energy surplus. When your energy is already depleted by necessary labor or childcare, the effort required is exponentially higher. This isn't about laziness. It's about the cognitive load of survival.
But by controlling the morning, you are controlling what is controllable, which provides a critical psychological anchor. By installing the 66-day habit, you reduce the mental friction of daily decision-making. The whole point is to establish a personal sovereignty over your schedule, which is even more crucial for individuals facing systemic hardship.
But personal sovereignty must align with biological feasibility. You cannot maintain sovereignty while running a massive sleep debt. If your commitment to the 5 a.m. rule forces you to choose between the 20-20-20 formula and the 7.5 hours of sleep your brain needs, the choice must always be the sleep. Otherwise, you're sacrificing long-term performance for a short-term, unsustainable feeling of productivity.
My position remains focused on the efficacy of intentional discipline. If you desire the results the top 5% achieve, you must embrace the hardship that the 95% avoid. The disciplined, intentional use of the quiet early hours, the victory hour, is the most effective way to establish the foundation of self-mastery, focus, and purposeful action that distinguishes stellar performers.
And I maintain that while structure and discipline are absolutely critical, true excellence requires that we first understand and respect our innate biological wiring, our sleep chronotypes. The focus should be on consistently obtaining sufficient, high-quality sleep that aligns with our internal clock. We have to maximize our potential without incurring the negative health consequences of chronic sleep deprivation or social jet lag.
Ultimately, we agree that small, consistent actions and unwavering dedication, embodying what we call true grit, are non-negotiable for unlocking one's potential.
Absolutely. The debate really illuminates that while the practices of self-mastery are essential, intense effort, reflection, learning, the optimal timing of those practices remains a deeply individualized equation. It requires a careful, conscientious alignment between discipline commitment and biological reality.